In the quiet amber of lamplight, a narrow hallway reaches forward like a gentle breath, its floorboards polished by countless careful steps and the soft drag of hemlines. The air holds a mild blend of coal smoke and kettled steam, of soap and beeswax and damp wool hanging to dry by the stove. Somewhere a clock ticks with patient resolve, and the house listens to itself the way a seashell listens to the sea. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Here, in the hush of this remembered place, hours do not rush so much as settle. If you enjoy quiet history like this, consider subscribing before you drift off, and let the slow rhythm of another century guide you towards sleep. Imagine the door with its brass knob, cooled to the touch at dawn, warmed by evening. On the glass above the letter slot a careful hand once painted a promise in small, steady letters, rooms and board. It is a simple sentence with 1,000 variations, found in many languages across England, Europe, and America in the long 19th century. It stands for a certain safety you could rent by the week, for breakfast placed in front of you at a known hour, for a bed that would be there when you return from the day, and for voices you might not know but would learn to recognize by sound alone. A boarding house was not a hotel and not quite a family home. It was an arrangement of ordinary mercies, a piece measured out in teacups and bread loaves and lamplight. At first light the mistress of the house is awake, stepping into her shoes with hardly a creak. She opens the kitchen range and coaxes yesterday's embers to the surface, puffing gently with practiced patience until the first wink of flame replies. The stove accepts her kindling, then the split logs, then the iron kettles that begin to sigh. Coffee is measured, oats scooped, a pan prepared for rashers or cakes depending on country and pocketbook. In England it may be porridge and a heel of bread with jam. In Paris a round tin of chicory and a loaf with its crust scored deep. In Berlin a neat arrangement of rolls, butter, and a soft egg warming in its shell. In Boston something heartier for the clerks who will stride out into a snow-flurried morning. Every kitchen has its grammar, and the sentences it makes are warm and edible and kind. Upstairs the house stirs in a soft chorus, a cough behind a door, the breathy shush of a match, the quick clink of a wash pitcher meeting the rim of its basin. There is the whisper of cold water poured into a porcelain bowl patterned with small blue ivy, the shock of that water on face and neck, the clean sting that follows. Shoes are pulled on, laces snugged. A pocket watch is checked. A collar is fastened. A dress is smoothed. The hallway smells faintly of starch and last night's coal smoke, of beeswax rubbed into a banister rail with a faithful cloth, of the lavender sachets that the landlady tucks into drawers because it pleases her to do so. Rooms are a study in modest sufficiency. An iron bed with a creak that will become familiar, a mattress with its quiet geography of stuffing, a quilt pieced from older fabrics that carry their own small memories. There is a washstand, its marble top pale and cool, a pitcher and basin kept spotless with the pride of someone who refuses stains their victory. There is a mirror slightly foxed around the edges where the silver has thinned, and in it you see a face changed by travel, by hope, by fatigue, by purpose. There is a chair that will never be quite comfortable but will never go missing, and a small writing table that dislikes ink blots but forgives them. Perhaps there is a window facing a street where horses clip past in talking pairs, or a small yard where laundry lifts like shy flags to the breeze. It is not grand and not poor, it is careful, which is another way of saying it is tended. Breakfast is a ceremony of reassurance. In London the bell is rung with controlled cheer and people arrive in their layers of wool and propriety. In Paris they drift down steps that curl like ribbon, greeting each other with a nod as white porcelain cups accept the day's first warmth. In Vienna a single window lets winter light in, fragile and blue, while the tablecloth does its best to be festive. In Boston the coat hooks hold sumps of snow and the boots under the bench leave disciplined puddles. And yet the coffee is so fragrant that everyone forgives the weather. Conversation at this hour is gentle. There is always the weather, which is a friend to the shy. There is the newspaper's polite outrage, employed the way salt is, to bring flavors forward without burning anyone's tongue. There are small reports from lives that do not overlap anywhere except here, a letter expected, a supervisor's cough, a child's new tooth, a mother's recipe. After breakfast life divides and completes itself. Clerks stride away counting strides to the office door. Seamstresses climb staircases to workshops bright with winter light, where needles go in and out and make a sound like a whisper. Teachers carry books that smell like chalk and soft old paper. In Paris, a singer crosses 2 courtyards and a street to the rehearsal hall and will come home hoarse and happy. In Edinburgh, a student of the Greek moods and tenses keeps them all in a notebook that fits in his pocket as the wind scours his cheeks awake. In Chicago, a young woman who writes invoices learns the invention of the morning, a new method of copying letters without laboring over each one twice, and it will change the ache in her hand. In every city there are footsteps returning late with hunger or early with disappointment, and to all those paths the boarding house is the end of the line and a beginning again. When the house is empty, the day belongs to the keeper and to the rooms. There is a special quiet then, the silence made by useful work. Bed linens are folded back and shaken and smoothed. Mattresses are turned with a firm and affectionate grunt. Washed pitchers are cleaned until the water glows in them. The bonnet of the maid-of-all-work is tied again behind her neck to keep her hair out of the soap bucket. Her shoes squeak faintly where water has found them. In winter, ashes are lifted from the stove into a pail that accepts them like a memory. In summer, windows are opened and propped with wooden wedges worn down to the shape of use. Deliveries come on a known rhythm. Milk that tastes like morning, coal that smells like weather, a paper cone of tea leaves caught at the top with a pin. Sometimes the postman steps in with a careful cough and a letter that travels to a door by name alone. The mistress of the house is part chef and part diplomat, part teacher of small civics and part steward of things that cannot be written in a ledger. Her knowledge is granular and affectionate. She knows the spoon that fits a certain hand and sets it there without comment. She sees the coat mended tight and offers a thimble and a seat by the window where the light is best. She knows whose boots arrive with a new tiredness in them and adds an extra heel of bread without mentioning it. There is a thrift that expresses itself as grace. The accounts must balance, but the house itself is allowed to be generous. Many houses are kept by widows who have learned to make a living out of kindness measured carefully. They become famous in a radius of 3 streets for their tea and their discretion, and the same hand that trusses a roast writes to a landlord in a hand so steady that it persuades. The parlor is where evening rearranges the day into something that can be lived with. In London there is a piano determined to stay in tune, and someone always capable of proving that it is nearly there. A shelf holds sermons and poems and novels and a few histories, their ownership vague, their usefulness not in dispute. In Paris a plant leans hard toward the window and a canary revises its opinion of dusk. In Berlin, chairs know their angles and the long table carries a chessboard whose pieces have been mended with glue and care. In New York there are 2 lamps, one unexpectedly bright and the other permanently forgiving, and between them a space where sewing and reading and listening fit at once. In Kansas City there is a rocking chair that has taught 5 people to nap and 1 new mother to rest without dropping off. In every parlor there is a spot where you can watch people without being watched, which is a comfort even the quietest people sometimes need. Supper returns the house to itself. The menu is geography you can eat. In England a roast, ambitious but sincere, parades forward with potatoes and their Sunday best and cabbage that never pretends not to be cabbage. In Naples, where boarding houses keep near the docks, fish arrives with the story of its morning still shining in it, and bread has the temper of sunshine. In Paris, stewed meat gives up kindness to carrots and onions in a way that reminds everyone that patience is a flavor. In Boston, chowder tastes of shoreline and modest pride, and in New Orleans, red beans tell their long day's story softly to rice. People when they sit at a table do a mysterious thing. They notice each other with pleasure and mercy. They pass salt, which is permission, and bread, which is agreement. They do not necessarily become friends and yet learn each other's rhythms so well that conversation can rest in the spaces between them. In those spaces a person catches their breath and remembers to be alive without performing it. A house with many private lives must be filled with rules that keep those lives from colliding. The rules are not harsh. Come to meals when the bell is rung. Do not make a noise after a certain hour unless a clock tells you it is almost morning. Do not smoke in bed. Do not use the good towels to polish boots. Do not invite the sort of person who treats a chair as if it can survive anything. Do pay on Saturday if you can, And if you cannot, explain yourself with a straight face and a promise the house can afford to believe. These rules are often typed neatly and framed, or handwritten in a patient hand and pinned above the umbrella stand. They are less law than choreography. When people keep them, the house moves without stumbling. When someone forgets, the landlady remembers for them, which is another service included in the rent. Seasons go through a boarding house the way music goes through a room, changing the air without altering the furniture. Spring brings doorways open to the hinge and windows propped on the confidence of a book. The smell of wet wool lifts, and herbs appear in little pots on sunny sills with ambitions bigger than their terracotta. Summer puts bowls of water in shaded corners for cats and for people too warm to go on without dipping a hand and patting a forehead. Autumn lights a lamp earlier each evening and makes apples taste like steadiness. Winter writes its name on glass and invites chair legs to sidle nearer to the stove. People carry their moods like weather and lay them down where a house of this sort can warm them. In European student quarters, the pension is a nest of languages, the parlor a soft debate in several keys. One tenant reads Greek aloud with reverence and guilt. Another shows a new watercolor so timidly that praise must arrive like a table set beforehand. A third confesses to missing a small dog from home and receives from three corners of the room the quietest comforts, offered as if nothing important were happening. In London, a governess returns with a mind tired from patience, and a smile that has pinched her cheeks faintly. The landlady, who remembers being 24, sets a cup of tea within reach without lowering her gaze to pity. In New York, a typewriter finds a home on a table that had thought itself too dignified for gears, and the house practices not flinching at the cheerful hammer of progress. In the mining towns of the American West, supper is more elemental and boots are louder and stories arrive with more tumble and dust, and yet the same lamp, the same quilt, the same steaming bowl of potatoes are proof that civilization is a stove as much as a lull. Money in a boarding house is a river of small decisions. A shilling added to the rent makes the jam possible next month. A penny saved on coal buys a new brush that teaches the stairs to shine. The ledger records numbers in a column that must behave themselves, while the margins quietly keep tally of favors extended and kindnesses returned. When a tenant falls behind, there is a conversation that begins with apology and ends with hope, and often includes the suggestion that the gentleman might help stack wood on Sunday, or the lady might read to an elderly resident in the afternoons. The house saves itself with everyone's hands. Pride is not a luxury here, it is a tool. Letters bind the rooms together as surely as beams do. A stamp that licks the roof of a country carries news across water and time, and when the postman steps into the hall smelling of wool and rain, he animates the air. In Berlin, a letter arrives for a young machinist, and his face changes like weather. In Naples, a folded square of paper that crossed the sea sits on a saucer beside a cup because the news inside it is best taken slowly between swallows of coffee. In New York, a telegram's curt syllables organize an entire week of thinking. In Edinburgh, a message arrives written on thin blue paper, the handwriting precise, the news modest and important, and the recipient puts the paper away after reading and then takes it out again because touch sometimes believes more easily than mind. The house watches these exchanges without intruding. It has learned that privacy can live surrounded by people who mind their own business with kindness. Cleanliness in this century is a conversation between invention and patience. There are houses with plumbing that makes a winter's bath something you can plan for instead of dream about, and there are houses that heat water kettle by kettle and ask the body to be satisfied with a washcloth and a good will. Soap thick with lye scours a tub clean while biting the hands that love the tub enough to scrub it. Towels are hung where the air can find them honorable work. In Paris, an enamel basin catches light like a poem and makes even cold water seem philosophical. In London, a footbath is enough to make a body think the world has remembered how to be kind. In America, a Saturday night can smell like pine and lemon oil and steam and the kind of privacy that comes when a door truly shuts all the way and the lock answers yes. Work returns people to the house evening after evening with stories that have all learned how to be brief. The factory gave overtime and took back 2 buttons. The office balanced its books and found that the bottom line was in better spirits than the top. The shop's bell rang so often that the door began to swagger. A pupil finally learned the multiplication tables as if they were a song. A play opened and found itself liked by strangers. A man who had been practicing a speech delivered it to the person in the mirror and found approval waiting. A seamstress finished 3 bodices that will never know her name, and yet will carry her hand in every faintly perfect curve of fabric. In the house the door opens, the coat is hung, the smile returns or does not return but is permitted to wait until morning to be found again. The table is set, and the evening does not demand eloquence, only attendance. Have you ever imagined living like this, where routine holds you calmly and the weather of other people's lives passes over you with the mildness of a breeze? Tell me in the comments if you would last a week in such a rhythm, waking to a bell and a cup in a known hallway, returning to a chair that no one else chooses because everyone understands that it is yours at this particular hour. It is not a life of spectacle. It is a life of decency. It is a way of being that considers rest one of the day's duties. There is a sound particular to stairs in houses like these, a negotiation between tread and riser, a sigh of wood needing weight. At night the steps speak slowly because feet are careful. The lamps in the hallway have been turned down to their lowest agreement with darkness, and the glass chimneys hold a frosting of breath that will wipe clean in the morning. In a back room a cat needs a cushion that once thought itself finished, and now realizes there is always more to be done. In the kitchen the stove lets go of its heat in small installments. The kettles cool and give the room a scent like patience. A window opens an inch to accept the night's message, then closes before the night can insist. The house sleeps, but not too deeply. It is a guardian that believes in both rest and readiness. In Paris a pension on the left bank teaches its residents the geography of courtyards, where laundry crosses the sky like white birds pinned to a line, and the echo of a violin rehearsing 2 floors away draws a soft applause from no one at all. A poet rents a small room and finds it sufficient for his notebook and his thoughts, which bloom more readily when the landlady compliments his healthy appetite. A Spanish teacher arrives with a suitcase full of irregular verbs and gives evening lessons to 2 clerks who want their vowels to sound more adventurous. On Sundays the table holds a roast chicken that knows how to bring a room to silence, not from reverence but from joy. People who sit there once will remember forever that the bird tasted as if it had been seasoned with conversation. In London a respectability that can be worn like a shawl wraps itself around the parlor each evening. A governess describes the day's triumph quietly, untying the knot of a child's stubborn letter B that finally learned which way to face. A copyist rubs ink from his fingers, leaving night-colored crescents that the landlady, who was once a girl who loved drawing, admires as if they were moons. A young man practicing law admits to feeling like a borrowed book he is not sure he has permission to keep. The house thinks about this and sets another chair near the fire for him without speaking. 2 chairs are a premise that friends can occur. In Berlin there is a discipline that never forgets its manners, and yet laughter catches even the sternest shoulders off guard. A tailor returns with a new stitch and a story about a customer whose waistcoat believes it is still 25. A student of engineering brings home a small gear like a coin and places it on the mantel as if it were a medal. The landlady dusts it each morning with a solemnity that makes the object braver. Winter there teaches the windows to hold a storm at a respectful distance, and inside the tea speaks fluent solace. In New York and Chicago, where a grid of streets draws the future with a ruler, boarding houses stand like commas in sentences that could run on forever. People come from everywhere. A woman from County Cork tells stories that make the air green and soft. A man from Warsaw keeps his hat on until he realizes the room keeps him warmer than any brim could. A printer from Virginia brings a smudge of newsprint to the corner of his mouth as a signature. A young stenographer discovers that her hands can learn a speed that feels like flying, and at night they ache pleasantly as if they had been running alongside a train. A teacher from Iowa misses the prairie, its long breath and its horizon that never stops promising tomorrow, and so the house lets her sit by the biggest window as if it were the sky. Work and rest in these places teach each other manners. There is a kind of fatigue at day's end that deserves a chair with a simple green cushion and time in which nothing is required of the mind but a slow assembling of the day into a shape that will let it be put away. Sometimes there is a game of cards that insists on nothing except an understanding of red and black and patience. Sometimes there is a newspaper read aloud in a voice so even that even the sorrowful stories forget to break hearts. Sometimes a child comes to visit a parent, and sits very straight on a very stern chair and is given a biscuit that breaks its sternness cleanly in two. As the century goes forward, inventions arrive and the house receives them with careful hospitality. Gaslight makes the lamps honest and bright. Electricity will come later, softly startling everyone with its hum. Plumbing tiptoes in, and washing days become less like a battle and more like firm persuasion. A ringing telephone seems at first like a guest too forward for its years. The house gets used to it, the way a person forgives a charming relative who never learned to knock. The typewriter, at first brassy as a trumpet, learns to be companionable when placed on a thick cloth and given a rhythm. Progress in these rooms does not shout, it is domesticated, taught to use a coaster and speak in an inside voice. Out west, where the wind does not bother to conceal itself, boarding houses endure dust with humor. Miners with faces like maps sit across from schoolteachers whose hands hold chalk dust as if it were lace. Supper is loud in a friendly way and quiet in a grateful way, and the door is a negotiator between gust and lamp. The table tells stories after the people leave it, its scratches are a city where forks once traveled. The bed frames make noises when the night leans on them and then settle into a purr of iron contentment. The porch boards hold the weight of boots and wishes. The stars make more promises than they can keep, and the house forgives them because promises are a kind of light. There are illnesses and recoveries here too, handled without drama and with a deeply practical tenderness. A kettle stays warm all day for broth. An orange appears on a plate like a sun that has agreed to be sliced. A blanket stored since last winter returns from the cupboard having remembered how to comfort. The house lowers its voice. Footsteps soften. Work reassigns itself. The person gets better, and a week later their chair creaks in that old familiar way, and everyone pretends they had not worried as much as they did, and the worry leaves grateful. The moral weather of these houses is temperate. Loudness has a hard time surviving, sharpness blunts itself on the edge of shared life. People learn to apologize as if they are placing a dish back where it belongs. They learn to accept a kindness without insisting on disowning their need. They learn to tell stories in lengths the room can hold. Strangers remain strangers, and yet some evenings friendship occurs without either party declaring a holiday. A borrowed book is returned on the day it was promised, and with it a folded square of paper marking a favorite line. A scarf left on a banister acquires the care of 3 people who are each sure they remember whose it is. A pair of gloves on the radiator finds its owner by scent and sentiment alone. Boarding houses for women deserve their own quiet paragraph. They were instruments of independence disguised as supervision. In London, a house just off Bloomsbury keeps rules to satisfy the times and rooms to satisfy the soul. Young women who teach, who type, who sew, and who study medicine live there with the knowledge that their ambitions are not childish. The hush in the hallway is not fear, it is concentration. Tea served at 9 is an argument for the work of 10. A late slice of bread and butter at 11 is the floor on which the next day will stand. Laughter hides in the cupboard and leaps out whenever anyone opens the door. It has excellent timing. Friendships here may last beyond addresses and years, and a letter posted in 1893 may find its answer in 1901, and both will feel as if they were written at the same table under the same useful lamp. In coastal towns, where ships fold and unfold their sails like prayers to the weather, boarding houses accept the vocabulary of tide. Meals shift to meet arrivals. Fish crowds the pan one evening and desserts it the next. Sea trunks occupy corridors with a kingdom's grace. Voices from other continents teach the stairs to echo in new ways. A child falls asleep to the murmur of men describing the wind, and grows up sure that weather is not a thing that happens to you but a thing you happen with. The landlady can tell from the smell in a sailor's coat whether he came ashore by kindness or by courage, and she adjusts the teapot accordingly. Sundays everywhere rethread the week. Breakfast lingers. Clothes smell of starch and good intentions. People write letters and rebutton the buttons that do not wish to be tamed. The house, relieved of its weekday gallop, slows to a stroll. A roast is attempted and succeeds. A pie might lift the lid of its own pastry with pride. Windows practice clarity. Cushions accept the full weight of human thought and do not collapse. Faces that have been trying all week to be realistic allow themselves, for an hour, to be hopeful. A person may fall asleep in a chair, and another person may cover them with a shawl, and both will consider that the finest liturgy a household can practice. Night arrives earlier in winter than seems strictly necessary, but houses like these know what to do. A lamp turned low makes a room think kindly. A square of carpet near the stove warms in a way that persuades the cat to forgive everyone. The click of a knitting needle is the metronome of a day winding down. A page is turned, and the paragraph on it announces that no emergency will occur, not tonight. Someone hums and does not know they are humming. Someone thinks about their hometown, and is not so sad they cannot also smile. Someone drinks something hot, and is not asked to explain why that helps. Tell me in the comments which detail feels most vivid to you: the basin's cool porcelain catching morning light, the parlor's piano stubbornly almost in tune, the ledger where numbers line up like polite people at a counter, or the staircase that knows the name of every footfall by sound alone. These are small items in a small world, but they accumulate toward a kind of durable happiness. As the 19th century leans toward its last decade, the boarding house changes costume without altering its posture. Residential hotels appear with carpets so thick that footsteps lose their memory of themselves. And yet the desk clerk says, "Good evening," with a warmth that belongs to earlier times. Apartment houses allow a person to own a door key that no one else uses, and privacy becomes a treasured word. Still, many discover that solitude can be overdone, and a dining room full of voices is a medicine science has yet to improve upon. Some houses modernize, others retire with dignity. A few remain exactly themselves, as if the century had been a cloak thrown over their shoulders and then removed again without leaving a mark. There are departures that feel like ceremonies. A boarder pays up, packs a trunk that has learned to accept one more item than it should, and hands over a key that meant more than a piece of brass ever admits. The landlady wraps the sandwich with the same care she gave to a cake last spring and says that the world can be trusted until proved otherwise. A fellow resident shakes hands with a gravity that has been earned by sharing the same teapot. Someone waves from a window, and the street receives a new footprint. The house puts the room back to rights and pauses a heartbeat longer than necessary in the doorway, not sad so much as respectful. Soon someone else will arrive with a different laugh and the same need. What remains after people go are the domestic fossils of 100 quiet lives. A shallow scratch where a chair disapproved of being moved. The shine a hand left on a banister. A recipe tried twice and perfected once. The faintest ring on a tabletop where a teacup sat on a day of good news. A newspaper pressed flat under a wobbly leg doing its small heroism for a year. The memory of a song that a voice sang only when it thought no one else was listening. The house keeps these like a museum that never wrote labels, but could if asked. If you enjoy quiet history like this, consider subscribing before you drift off, and let your breath fall into step with the easy marching of those old hours. There is a reason these places persist in memory more stubbornly than grander buildings do. They are shaped to the human scale. They are as interested in enough as the world often is in more. They know how to convert money into warmth and ritual into relief. They argue without anger that company is a form of shelter, and that supper laid at a predictable hour can teach the day to forgive itself. Now the lamp turns down a little further, and the hallway folds itself neatly around the last footfall. The stove gives the room its last small gifts of heat. The basin glows faintly where the moon finds it. The clock refuses to hurry. Someone who worried, worries less. Someone who was tired finds that the bed remembers the curve of their back and is willing to hold it. Outside, a horse passes and leaves the air braided behind it. Inside, people breathe in their sleep and keep one another human. If you are listening in your own room, listening for sleep to come, imagine the quilt pulled up, the pillow changed to the cooler side, the quiet of a house that understands that the world can be gentle. Imagine the words rooms and board on the door, not as a promise of grandeur, but as an oath of comfort kept, week after week, under the tender governance of lamplight and care. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check info.